The man who could not be possessed. On inflation as possession. A man boasted that no god had ever taken him over. He was perhaps 35. He was, in his town, a man of some local reputation, not famous, but solid, the kind of citizen who served on committees, who was respected at the inn, who had opinions on every matter the town discussed. He prided himself, above all, on his independence of mind. He had never, he said, gone with the crowd. He had never followed a fashion. He had never voted for a man simply because the others were voting for him. He had never gone into a trance at any church. He had never been carried away. "I am too clear-headed," he told his friends in the tavern. "I have always thought for myself. I am not by my nature a man any god can take. The gods need a soft place to land. I have no soft place. I am, in this respect, the freest man in this town." The friends drank to his freedom. They had heard the boast before. They had drunk to it before. They were the kind of friends who agreed, on the surface, with whatever a man said about himself, and who, in the deeper register of their thought, kept their own observations to themselves. That winter, a small bright thought entered him. It came in as he was shaving. He had been standing in front of the small mirror in his washroom on a Tuesday morning. With the razor against his cheek, the morning had been ordinary. He had slept well. He had been about to dress for work. The thought arrived dressed as his own voice. It said, "I have just understood something important." He paused with the razor. He waited. The voice, his own voice, continued. It described in a few clear sentences an idea about the structure of society. The idea was new to him. He had not, before that morning, thought it. But it arrived in his head with the cadence of his own thinking, in the vocabulary of his own thinking, and it had immediately the feeling of correctness that all his own real thoughts had had. He nodded to it. It was, after all, his thought. He finished shaving. He thought about the idea for the rest of the day. He found it increasingly persuasive. He found, in fact, that it explained several things he had been puzzled about. He found that it provided answers to questions he had not, before that morning, known he had been asking. By that evening at the tavern, he had begun to share it. His friends listened. They were, by their habit, polite. They were also, on this occasion, somewhat interested. The idea did seem to explain several things. It had the quality, in his mouth, of an idea that had been carefully worked out. By the following spring, the thought had become his philosophy. He spoke of it at every dinner. He had developed it in the intervening months in considerable detail. He had written in a private notebook, perhaps 200 pages elaborating it. He had begun in a small way to publish a pamphlet here, an essay in the regional paper there. The pamphlets were well received. He had a knack, he discovered, for clear expression. He had always had it, in fact. He had just never had a thought worth expressing. By summer, it had become his movement. Men came from the next town to hear him speak. He held meetings in the upper room of the tavern. The meetings were full. He had developed in his speaking a particular cadence, a way of letting certain sentences land, a way of pausing before the key word. He had not, in his 35 years, known he had this skill. By autumn, it had a name. The name was his name, with the word ism attached. The men who came to the meetings had, on their own initiative, begun to use it. He had not, at first, encouraged them. He had been, in his early speeches, modest about his role. He had presented the thought as an idea, not as his personal doctrine. But the men of the meetings had insisted on the name. They had wanted, in some way he could understand, to belong to something. The name made the belonging easier. He had accepted the name. He had not, in accepting it, fully noticed that he was accepting a transformation of himself into a thing the name pointed at. By the end of the first year, the movement had a small newspaper. By the end of the second year, it had branches in 7 towns. By the end of the third year, it had a position on every public matter of the region. The position was always his position. The men of the branches consulted him on every question. He gave his opinion. The opinion was published. The branches voted accordingly. He had become, in 3 years, the kind of man other men listened to. He had also become, though he could not in this period see it, the kind of man who no longer listened to anyone. The thought, which had entered as a small bright thing one winter morning, had grown. It had grown into his philosophy, his movement, his name. It now lived in him in a way that his earlier self had not lived in him. His earlier self, the citizen who had served on committees, who had been respected at the inn, was, by the third year, gone. He was, in the place where that man had been, the thought itself, wearing the man's body. In the second year of the second decade, the thought told him to drown the children of the next village. The next village had, in some way the thought had explained, refused the movement. The next village had, in its public statements, mocked the thought. The thought required, for its further development, that the next village be made an example of. He went down to the river with a small group of his most loyal followers. There were perhaps 15 of them. The children of the next village, who came down to the river, as children did, to play in the late afternoons, had not been warned. They were perhaps 20. The followers gathered them gently into a small group. The followers were not, by their natures, cruel men. They were ordinary men who had, over years, taken on the thought as their own. They did what the thought told them to do. They did not, in the gathering, hurt the children. He gave the order. They obeyed. The drownings took perhaps an hour. He stood on the bank and watched. The followers waded into the river with the children. They held the children under, gently one by one, until the children stopped struggling. They came out wet. They placed the small bodies on the bank. A neighbor's child, a girl of perhaps 8, who had not been one of the children gathered, who had been watching from a thicket on the far bank, called up to him. She did not run. He had not noticed her until she called. "Sir," she said. He turned. "Who is the one who decided this?" He had not in 3 years been asked such a question. He had been asked many questions. He had answered them all. He had never been asked, in this particular form, who was deciding. "I decided this," he said. His voice was calm. It had the cadence of his own voice. It had, in fact, the cadence the thought had given his voice. "I am free. I have never been possessed. I have decided this on the basis of clear reasoning. The reasoning is published. You may read it. It explains why this was necessary." The girl looked at him from across the river. She did not, in her looking, seem to be afraid. She had perhaps not understood in her 8 years the danger of what she was watching. She had, in some sense, only the question. "Then who," she said, "is the I that decided?" He turned to look at her more fully. The followers beside him on the bank had paused. They had heard the question. They were, in some part of themselves, asking it also. He opened his mouth to answer. He could not find an answer. He could find in his head only a voice. The voice was the voice that had entered him one Tuesday morning, 3 years before, as he had been shaving. The voice was his own voice. The voice was also not his own voice. The voice was smiling. The voice was no longer his. He stood on the bank of the river for a long time. The followers, after some minutes, walked away. They left the small bodies on the bank. They did not, in their walking, speak to him. They had heard the question. They had also somewhere asked it. They would not, in the years that followed, all of them remain in the movement. The girl walked away also, eventually. She went home. She told her parents what she had seen. Her parents took her that night to a neighboring province. They did not, in any year after, return. He stayed on the bank. He stayed until evening. He did not, in the evening, return to the upper room of the tavern. He did not, in the months that followed, give any more speeches. The movement, without his speaking, dwindled. The branches consulted him. He did not reply. The thought in him continued to speak. He could hear it. He could not, after the river, mistake it any longer for his own. He left the town eventually. He went, in his 40th year, to a small village in a remote province where he had no name. He took a different name. He worked as a farmhand for the last 20 years of his life. He spoke very little. He had become, somehow, the kind of quiet man people noticed in the way they had once noticed the noisy man he had been. The thought in his head continued to speak. He did not, in the 20 years, fully evict it. He had learned in the river that it was not his. He could distinguish it now from his own thinking. He could refuse, when he wanted to act on its suggestions, but he could not silence it. It had moved into him in the morning of the shaving and had made his head its house. It is, in the heads of many men still living, it is patient, it is bright, it speaks always in the cadence of the host's own voice. The God that takes you over does not wear a God's face, he wears your face, he speaks in your voice, he calls himself your insight. The man who cannot be possessed is the man who has already been taken. The thought arrives one Tuesday morning in the cadence of your own thinking. It grows, it becomes your philosophy, your movement, your name. By the time the small girl on the far bank asks the question, you have lost the answer. The question, however, remains. It is the only thing that, in time, evicts the thought from its tenancy. The eviction is partial. The thought stays. You learn to distinguish